Chapter 23. "You've got to be kidding me, Samuel," Carolyn said, throwing her hands up and letting them slap down against her thighs. "I thought we were done with all of this. How are they here? How is it possible?" "I don't know," Sam said, pacing in front of her. Carolyn was a mess of emotions, and had been from the moment that poor boy and woman had ridden back through the gates. "And you're sure it's them?" she asked, her desperate mind trying to find some overlooked detail, some loophole Sam and Joe had missed. She needed it to not be true. She'd never be able to close her eyes at night, knowing Julio Roja was out there somewhere in the shadows, hunting for her husband and son. "As sure as I can be without seeing it with my own eyes," Sam replied. His face was grim and stony, and Carolyn knew no amount of arguing was going to change his mind. She massaged the bridge of her nose with her fingers, trying to stave off the migraine pushing on the edges of her consciousness. "And it's just the two of you going out there?" she asked, looking at Sam, her eyes lingering over his injured leg. "That's the plan for now," Sam said. "Though Jacob is pretty fired up, he guessed we were going out there and asked Joe if he could come along and back us up." "Jacob isn't a trained fighter," Carolyn said. "No, but he's a tough son of a bitch," Sam said, "and he's been in a scrap or two over the years." "A scrap or two?" Carolyn said, shaking her head in disbelief. "And you're considering taking him with you to fight the fucking cartel?" "The cartel?" Eric's voice blurted out from the back door. Carolyn spun around in alarm, her eyes widening in horror as her son stood at the screen door on the back porch, looking into the kitchen with horror etched on his face. "Is that who killed those people?" "Well, we don't know," Carolyn blurted out, trying to stop the flood of thoughts and emotions about to start racing through Eric's head. "Probably is," Sam said, and Carolyn turned to fix him in a debilitating glare. Was her husband out of his mind? Did he not understand the severity of the situation? Or how this would make Eric feel? "What?" Sam asked, looking between the two of them. "He's a man now. He deserves to hear the truth of it." Eric stared at his parents through the screen, mouth hanging open in shock. Carolyn rushed to the door and opened it, grabbing him by the arm and ushering him inside. She pulled out the kitchen table chairs and forced him to sit. She then grabbed a glass and poured water into it from a pitcher. She placed the glass on the table beside him. "Have some water, baby," she said. "I know this is hard to hear." I'm fine," Eric said, suddenly shaking his head, as if he were trying to fling the bad thoughts out of his brain. He then reached over, grabbed the glass in one hand and drained it quickly before slamming it back down. He turned to his father. "So when are we going?" "We?" Sam asked, his eyebrows going up. "Absolutely not," Carolyn spat, stepping between the two of them, as if to stop any kind of ridiculous agreement they were about to make. "Why not?" Eric asked, rising to his feet to mirror his parents. "Dad, you just said I'm not a kid anymore, and they're going to be looking for me. Why shouldn't I go out there with you?" "Because you're not ready for it," Carolyn said, interrupting before her husband could speak. She knew firsthand the cruelty and malice of Julio Roja. She had lived through his earlier attempts at killing her husband. He was a tireless enemy who stopped at nothing when he held a grudge. Now that evil eye was aimed at her son, her precious baby boy. There was no way she was going to willingly consent to placing that boy in this maniac's crosshairs. "Dad," Eric said, trying to look around her at Sam. Carolyn also turned to her husband, keeping a severe and pleading look in her eyes. She was silently begging Sam to side with her on this. If he took Eric out into the field to face an enemy like this, there was a good chance her son would never come back. And while Carolyn had found a newfound purpose in life, helping to care for the community, It all meant nothing without her husband and child beside her. Sam opened his mouth to respond, his eyes not leaving those of his wife. He closed his mouth again and seemed to be in deep thought. Finally, he looked past her at Eric and took a long, deep breath. "Your mother's right, son," he said, to Carolyn's great relief. It felt as though a great weight had been instantly removed from her shoulders, and she nearly collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs as she exhaled. "What?" Eric exclaimed, walking around Carolyn now to stand face to face with his father. "That's bullshit. You've been training me all this time, and for what if not this?" "I'm training you so that if trouble finds you again, you'll be able to defend yourself," Sam said. "Not so you can go looking for it when you don't have to." "Don't have to?" Eric scoffed, gesturing around himself, as his parents weren't truly seeing the situation for what it was. "This is all happening because of me. So you're going to go out there and risk your life, but I'm not allowed to do the same?" "That's right," Sam said, his face hard and stern. "How is that fair?" Eric asked. "It's not," Sam replied simply. "This isn't about fair. This isn't some little kid game where everyone gets their turn to go out and be a hero. This is about you staying here to keep an eye on things and run things while your uncle and I go and get what's needed." "I'm not a kid," Eric insisted. And Sam stormed up to him so fast that Carolyn worried that, for the first time ever, Sam was about to physically strike their child. "You're right. You're not a kid," Sam said, his mouth just inches from Eric's face. Eric's eyes went wide, and it looked as though he wanted desperately to jump back and away from his father. But to the boy's credit, he stood his ground. "You're a man now, and sometimes that means doing shit you don't want to do. Your uncle and I aren't going out there to play cowboy and fight. We're going to try to get the medical supplies this community needs. If we're lucky, it'll be a boring trip and we'll be back fast. But while we're gone, I need someone here who has learned from me over the years, who can work with your mother to run this farm while I'm gone. Now, can you do that? Or are you a child?" There was silence between them that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Eric was clearly alarmed by the outburst, and it looked as though his mind might not have even been working. But finally he nodded slowly. "Yes, sir," he choked out, his voice a barely audible whisper. "Good man," Sam said, taking a step back and looking the boy up and down. "Now I expect you to listen to every word your mother says while I'm gone, and do your damnedest with her to keep this place running smoothly. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Eric repeated, sounding more sure of himself this time. "There we go," Sam said, giving his son a pat on the arm. He turned to Carolyn with his eyebrows up, as if silently asking her if she approved of how he had handled this situation. She gave him a warm yet sad smile, tilting her head to the side as she leaned up to kiss him. "Thank you," she whispered to him as their lips parted, so softly that Eric could never have heard it. He wrapped her in a tight hug in response. Sam then turned and headed toward the back door, giving his son a nod of approval as he vanished out into the setting sun. "I hope you understand why it has to be this way," she said to her son, who was still standing in the same spot. He didn't respond. Instead, he followed his father out the back door, tromping down the porch steps, and heading off, Lord knows where. Chapter 24. Early the next day, Eric sat on the back porch, listening to the sound of the birds as they cheeped and chirped their good morning songs. His father and uncle were heading out that very moment, and most of the community had journeyed to the main gate in order to see them off. Eric had stayed behind. After his father's harsh words the night before, he was still feeling salty about the entire affair. Jacob was going to be going along with them instead of him. Jacob wasn't even family. He wasn't even trained. It was ridiculous that his father would choose to leave him behind when someone's life was on the line. Eric's mind shifted to Jerry, the young man clinging to life in Dr. Jeffrey's clinic. He'd gotten to know the guy over the last few months. There was a core group of teens and young adults on the farm who liked to hang out together, passing the time the way teenagers always had. Jerry was smart and kind, never had a bad word to say about anyone. And now he was lying in a makeshift clinic run by a nearsighted veterinarian, fighting for his life, because he had been attacked by a group of thugs who had been looking for Eric. Regardless of whatever his parents believed, he was connected to this just as much as they were. If Roja was out there somewhere and he was killing the people of this community, then maybe Eric was the one who had to confront him. Maybe doing that could keep these people safe. And maybe it would do something to fill the horrible empty hole in his heart he felt every time he closed his eyes and saw the face of the old man he had murdered. That murder had started a chain reaction that had followed them out of the city and across these many miles. Now, 9 people were dead because of his actions. And one person, his friend, was grievously wounded. Moreover, his father and uncle were on their way out there, where the enemy was waiting somewhere. His father's belief that they could make their way into the surrounding area and avoid conflict with Roja and the cartel was laughable. Eric knew if they were out there, they were everywhere, and soon enough, there'd be no getting away from them. His father knew this, too. He knew somewhere out there he would encounter Roja or his men. He wasn't going out there for medicine. He was going hunting. He was going to try to put an end to this craziness before it reached their home. Eric saw through it, and he was angry his mother either didn't see it or just didn't care enough to let him join in. He stood up in frustration, pacing back and forth as thoughts and emotions raced through his teenage mind. He needed to take a walk and clear his head, but he couldn't go journeying to the back 20 acres like he normally would to get some time to himself and reflect on what was going on in his brain. Eric was taking on a lot more responsibility now, and he had to make himself available if his mother or the people of this community needed him. Eric realized there was one place he could go, one place he wanted to go for an entire day now, but had purposely stayed away. Taking off across the field their backyard opened into, Eric headed toward the clinic. It was only a short 5-minute walk there, and he approached the doctor's door hesitantly, giving a small knock. Yes, come in, Dr. Jeffries called out. But this better be important. I've got a wounded boy in here. Eric pushed open the door and looked inside. He saw the doctor turn to fix him in his gaze, his brows and nose scrunched up in confusion. Young Mr. Shields, he said in surprise. What can I do for you this morning? I would have thought you'd be seeing off your father. Oh, I just wanted to pop in here and check on the patient, he said, looking over at Jerry, who was stirring at the sound of his friend's voice. Eric, he called out, his voice sounding so weak and tired. Hey, yeah, man, it's me, Eric said, coming to his friend's side and reaching out to take his hand and give it a tight squeeze. I'm right here. I know, Jerry said, coughing out a laugh. I got stabbed in the stomach, not the eyes. I can see you. All right, Eric said, scratching at the back of his neck in embarrassment. You holding up all right, man? Well, as can be expected, the young man grunted. All right, that's enough, Dr. Jeffries said, shouldering his way between the two boys. He needs rest. He doesn't need any more questioning or gossiping or anything of the like, understand? Of course, Eric said, his cheeks burning red with embarrassment. What was he even doing here? Why was he bothering the poor guy when all he probably wanted to do was sleep? Sorry, man, Eric said, backing away from the table and away from the doctor's withering, squinty glare. Wait, Eric, Jerry called out, reaching for him as their hands slipped apart. Eric moved back toward him despite the doctor's very annoyed look. I'm here, Eric said, grabbing his friend's hand once more. I'm right here. Eric, they were asking about you, Jerry said. And Eric suddenly felt his stomach drop through the floor. What? He asked, the color draining from his face. Who, Jerry? Who was asking about me? But Jerry's eyes had closed, and he'd gone quiet. If not for the steady rise and fall of the young man's chest, Eric might have believed him dead. But it seemed as though weakness had overtaken him, pushing him deeper into a still sleep. Jerry, Eric insisted, squeezing the young man's hand now in desperation and horror. That's enough, the doctor repeated, grabbing Eric by the wrist and physically prying him off his unconscious patient. He's talking nonsense. He goes in and out like this. If you want him to get any better, you'll leave him alone and tell the rest of your family to stop barging in here whenever they see fit. Unless it's your mother, come to help out medically. I don't want to see another person named Shields darkening my doorstep unless they have a fever over 101. Or they're missing a limb. Am I clear? Eric wasn't listening, though. He pushed back against the doctor, desperately trying to continue his line of questioning. Jerry, what happened out there, man? He asked again, his voice pleading with the boy's still and silent form. Out! The doctor screamed, now physically shoving Eric toward the door. A moment later, Eric found himself standing outside the door in the grass as the doctor roughly slammed the entryway shut in his face. He could hear the older man slide a lock into place and knew right away that he wasn't going to be able to question Jerry about this again, not until he was on his feet and out on his own, away from the doctor's protective custody. Eric stumbled away from the door, backing up until he felt the bark of a large tree just behind him. The moment he touched the huge object, his knees crumbled beneath him, and he fell into a seated position. Eric's eyes stared at the grass without ever truly focusing. Julio Roja was alive. He was out there somewhere. He was looking for Eric. And his father and uncle had just journeyed out and put themselves directly in his crosshairs. Chapter 25. Yeah, Sam cried out, pressing his horse onward as he, Jacob, and Joe set off across the countryside. They'd chosen to take the scenic route on their way to the deserted town, not for any personal preference, but because they felt it was probably safer and would allow them their best chance at completing this mission without encountering trouble. While part of Sam wanted desperately to find Julio Roja and put an end to this once and for all, he also knew there was no way Roja was going to face him fairly again. That opportunity had come and gone back in the city, back when Julio's uncle still drew breath. If they encountered the drug lord out here, the only potential outcome was an all-out firefight, in which they'd be vastly outgunned. Their only hope to finally put the stain of Julio Roja behind them forever would be to stay hidden for as long as possible, while preparing for an inevitable confrontation with him and his cartel soldiers. Let them break themselves against the farm wall, suffering heavy losses as they attempted to lay siege to a fully prepared and capable community. Sam was confident they could weather that storm and come out clean on the other side. Roja wasn't chasing them through the city streets anymore. He was going to have to fight them on their turf and overcome their defenses. Sam didn't think the drug lord had the manpower or the firepower to accomplish such a feat, at least based on what he'd seen his last time serving on the force. But the farm's sustainability relied on missions like this, where teams would have to venture out into the world to hunt, gather, and scavenge for whatever could be useful. Anyone out on such a mission was in grave danger, and that truly worried Sam. "So, this Roja guy," Jacob said from his horse, riding alongside Sam and Joe. "He really as dangerous as you guys are making him out to be." "Honestly, I'm probably underselling him, if anything," Sam replied with a grim shake of his head. "If we encounter his men out here, we need to haul ass." "Man, you think we will?" Jacob asked, his voice shaky and unsure of himself. Sam sighed silently. He wanted to convey the severity of this situation to the young man, but it seemed as though he only succeeded in terrifying him. That wasn't the right move. Jacob was a capable farmhand and a great rider, but he wasn't the kind of guy who routinely went out to fight a cartel army. "It's possible," Joe replied, trying to take charge of the conversation. He clearly saw which way the wind was blowing here and wanted to help ease their friend and colleague's fears. "But we've faced them before, and we know they're out there looking for us. So if the going gets tough, the tough get going. We haul our asses back to the farm and we make sure these fuckers aren't following us." "Exactly," Sam said, once more grateful that his friend was there beside him to help back him up on matters such as this. "Hey, isn't that the town?" Jacob called out, pointing ahead and drawing all of their attention as they squinted in the mid-morning sun. "I think so," Sam said. "Good old Cranberry, one of the last true small towns left in this area." "Or at least it was," Joe corrected. Sam shrugged at the comment. "It should be nice and easy," Sam went on to say. "Last time we sent a crew through here, they said it was completely deserted. So we get in, find the pharmacy, blow that safe, and then we get the hell out." "Makes sense," Jacob said. "Here's hoping it's that simple," Joe said with a confident smile, as they kicked some more speed into their horses. As reported by their last crew, Cranberry seemed totally empty. There were a lot of broken windows, disabled cars, open doors, and absolutely no people. "I wonder why the whole town just packed it up," Jacob said, looking around at the overgrown grass and the eerie stillness of the location. "Probably thought they'd have a better go of it out there," Sam said, nodding at the outskirts of town out toward the open road. "Maybe they didn't think it was safe here." "I wouldn't think it's safe," Joe added, looking around. "Really?" Jacob asked, scanning what was once an idyllic, quiet, and likely boring little town. "Looks pretty tame to me." "Oh, it is," Joe said, nodding at the buildings and homes. "But there's a reason we have a wall, man. When people set up shop somewhere and there are no defenses anywhere in sight, others are going to come sniffing around and try to take what's not theirs." "Ah," Jacob said. "That's pretty sad. Are people really that shitty?" "Yes," both Sam and Joe said in unison. "There's the pharmacy," Sam said, pointing up the road. It was a tiny little store that sat on a corner. A sign that read Bell's Pharmacy sat above the doorway, with a smaller sign beneath it that read Serving Cranberry for over 100 years. "Damn, 100 years," Jacob said, looking from the sign down to the pharmacy door, which lay in wooden splinters and hung off its hinges. "Looks like somebody really wanted to get inside." "Might have been our people," Joe added. "They had to get in to discover that safe." "True," Sam said. "They did what they had to do." The three of them hid their horses in the back of the store, in a small alley, connected to a tiny municipal parking lot. Sam didn't want to keep them out in front of the store, just in case there did happen to be someone else sneaking around this location. The three of them walked back around to the front of the building and climbed inside through the shattered door. The inside of the store was an absolute mess, with shelves knocked over, glass all over the floor, greeting cards strewn all over the place, and not a soul in sight. "Jesus," Joe said. "To think this was a lively little store just half a year ago." "Put it out of mind," Sam said. That world is gone. It's a whole new ball game now. You really think the old world isn't coming back? Jacob asked, his voice heavy with concern. I don't think it'll ever be the same, Sam replied simply. You don't think they're trying to restore the power? He asked. The hope that Sam heard in the young man's voice broke his heart, but he didn't believe in providing people with false hope in the form of lies. He was a straight shooter and would continue to shoot straight for as long as he lived. I'm sure they tried, Sam said with a shrug. But the fact that it hasn't happened yet leads me to believe that it ain't happening at all. I don't know, I can't believe that, Jacob said. Better believe it, buddy, Joe said, backing up Sam. It's been 6 months and there's been nothing. If it was going to happen, it would have already happened. The government isn't coming back. The military is likely broken down into smaller divisions, and power grabs are probably happening all over. It's a brave new world, and sure, it'd be nice if the old one came back. But if that ever happens, it'll be a happy surprise that we all can celebrate. I'm not going to sit around waiting for it. Joe's right, Sam responded as he stalked through the ruined store toward the counter. You need to just soldier on and act like this is the world now because there's a damn good chance it is. Sam walked around the counter, noting Jacob's silence. He seemed to get the message they were trying to impart. Though it hurt to consider, it was the truth of the world now, and it likely would continue to be for a long, long time. Back here, Sam called, walking through the open door to the pharmacy's back room. Empty bottles were strewn about the floor, and Sam kicked them aside with contempt. Everything readily available back here was already gone. But if no one had managed to pry open that safe yet, then it was possible the trip would prove bountiful. Hey, there it is, Jacob said, pointing to the far end of the room. A huge man-sized safe sat against the wall, and it was still completely locked and sealed shut. Jackpot, Joe said, grinning from ear to ear. No one's managed to open this beauty yet. Let's change that today, Sam said, slipping off his backpack and setting it on the floor. He unzipped the bag and reached inside, pulling out a small explosive covered in an adhesive substance. This should do the trick. Want me to do the honors? Joe asked, holding out a hand. You're the demolitions expert, Sam replied, placing the small bomb into his friend's waiting palm. That I am, he replied, crossing over to the safe and kneeling in front of the lock. He pressed the adhesive into the surface of the safe's door and made sure it was stuck before taking a step back to admire its positioning. Perfect. Light it up, Sam said, looking back at Jacob, who hadn't said much since noticing the safe. Sam had a feeling their conversation was still weighing on him. Had Jacob been holding out hope that the world would be restored one day? Were other people on the farm clinging to that same delusion? Sam envied them for their naivete, but it was something that experience had taken from him long ago. A long time ago, he'd learned that a pessimist was nothing more than something an optimist called a realist. He'd loved to believe in dreams and happy endings again. Life was much simpler in the days of his blissful youth. But you don't survive a long and storied police career in one of the most dangerous cities in the United States without seeing things that shake your ability to hope. As Joe took a lighter from his pocket and lit it, Sam found himself hoping Jacob was right and he was wrong. He hoped for this, but he knew it to be false. That realism was a burden sometimes, but it helped to keep people alive. It was the difference between sitting around, waiting for help, and forging your own path when you understand that no one is going to save your skin but you. Joe pressed the flame to the fuse and jumped back as sparks flared to life. The two of them averted their gaze from the safe, while Jacob retreated back into the store. A small but still significant explosion rocked the room, shaking the floor beneath their feet. as the sound of cracking steel could be heard throughout the shop. The back room filled with smoke, and Joe was already hard at work waving it away with his massive arms. Sam joined in, and together they cleared their field of vision within moments until the safe door came into view. To Sam's great relief, it was hanging open. The lock snapped completely in half. "Oh, sweet victory," Joe said, walking over and pulling open the door. "Oh, jackpot." Sam walked over and gasped as he looked inside. Within the huge safe were bottles upon bottles of antibiotics, pain relievers, asthma inhalers, and medications of every kind. It was enough to keep Dr. Jeffries happy for years to come. "Damn," Sam said with a low whistle. "If that ain't the mother lode." There weren't any bandages or any other first aid items of any kind to be found, but they'd be able to make do with this and worry about the other items another day. Joe dropped a huge empty bag off his shoulders, unzipping it as the two of them continued to drop bottle after bottle within. "Where's Jacob?" Joe asked, as they were nearly done, having stuffed the bag to its near busting point. "I think he's deep in thought," Sam said, pointing out toward the store. "Ah, you kind of shattered his worldview there," Joe observed. "Me?" Sam's eyebrows shot up. "You were the one talking about how the military is probably fighting itself over territory." "I was just backing up your truth with some more truth," Joe said. "You were the one who started it all." "Oh, fine," Sam said. "I'll take the blame on this one, but someone has to tell these people the reality of what we're facing." "Hey, you're preaching to the choir here, brother," Joe said, as he struggled to get the zipper closed over the last bottle. "I'm the one who agrees with you." "Mira! Mira!" a voice sounded from outside the store. Sam heard the Spanish word for look and turned quickly as a series of loud gunshots sounded in the store. Both Sam and Joe dropped to the floor as the shots continued to ring out. "Jacob!" Sam screamed, crawling along the floor toward the door that led into the store. Jacob was crouched behind the counter, eyes wide as he clutched his shoulder. Sam could see blood seeping from between his fingers and realized he was hit. "How bad?" Sam asked. But Jacob didn't answer. His eyes were huge and his breath was washing out in huge gulps. Sam crawled from behind the counter as gunshots continued to fill the store. He grabbed Jacob and inspected his body, noting that the shoulder wound seemed to be the only injury he'd sustained. "You're all right," Sam insisted. But Jacob wasn't hearing him. He was looking beyond Sam now, his eyes focusing on nothing as he went into a state of mental shock. "Eat this, cocksuckers!" Joe screamed as he exploded out of the back room, automatic pistols in both hands and the huge bag of pill bottles strapped to his back. He unloaded on their assailants, and Sam peeked over the counter to see two men, rifles in hand, thrown back by the storm of bullets Joe pelted them with. "Is that all of them?" Sam called out as the gunfire ceased. "Only ones I can see," Joe replied, "but they might have friends nearby." Sam ducked behind the counter and looked Jacob in the eye. "All right, Jacob, we're going to get you out of here," Sam said, "but I need you to work with me here." Jacob didn't respond. He simply continued to hyperventilate while applying pressure to his gunshot wound. "Come on, man," Sam said, slapping the farmhand across the face lightly. That seemed to bring Jacob back to the here and now, and his eyes turned to Sam's face and focused. "Oh, Sam, they got me," Jacob said. "I'm hit." "You're all right. They got you in the shoulder," Sam said. And the look of relief on Jacob's face was palpable. "Joe took care of the guys who shot you, but we need to move. You gotta run, and I'll be right there beside you, all right?" Yeah, Jacob said with a frantic nod. "Yeah, I can do that." "Good man," Sam replied, reaching out to help Jacob to his feet. "Welcome back," Joe said, standing with his gun still pointed at the windows. "We're ready to move." "Damn right we are," Sam replied. "Let's get the fuck out of here." Joe ran out first, followed closely by Sam, with Jacob limping alongside them. They stepped over the bodies of the two men who had attacked, and Sam didn't recognize them. But they looked like they could be cartel members. Of course, Sam couldn't be sure. Another shot rang out, and suddenly the air was filled with the sounds of loud bangs and screams in Spanish. "Shit," Joe called out. "Move!" "Come on," Sam said, grabbing Jacob and pulling him along. Sam couldn't get a good sense of how many men were shooting at them, but there had to be at least 10, based on the frequency of the shots. There was no time to stand their ground and return fire. They had to move, and they had to do it now. As they ran over the uneven pavement, Jacob stepped awkwardly, and his bad knee buckled. He crumpled to the ground as Jacob started to run past him. Sam hit hard, pain exploding up his leg to his hip. Jacob stopped and turned around. "Go!" Sam cried out, motioning for the young man to follow Joe, who was also stopping to come back for him. "Go, damn it! Get back to the farm! Keep them safe!" Jacob's face contorted in a moment of otherworldly bravery and determination. He removed his hand from his shoulder wound, reached down to grab Sam's arm, and pulled him back to his feet. "Come on," Joe called out, laying down some covering fire for them. "I got you," Jacob cried out, starting to move with Sam, before a bullet caught him in the back. He screamed as he fell to the street. Sam pitched forward, catching himself against one of the disabled cars and keeping himself up. The street started to fill with gunfire as their assailants closed in. "Help!" Jacob screamed, holding out a hand. Sam reached for him, but Joe's huge arm wrapped around Sam's neck and forcefully yanked him away. "Come on, we can't stop," Joe cried out. "No, we can't leave him," Sam screamed in horror, reaching out his arm to help their fallen friend. But Joe was relentless and far stronger, pulling Sam away as Jacob continued to scream after them. "Please don't leave me," he cried out, his face a horrified mask of pain and terror. Sam gasped as Joe pulled him around the corner, practically dragging him into the alleyway as the sound of Jacob's screams echoed through the streets of the deserted town. "No!" Sam screamed. "Jacob, I'm sorry." "Come on," Joe said, his voice cold, as though he were completely indifferent to the situation. He pulled Sam into the alley and practically threw him at his horse. "What the fuck?" Sam screamed, as Joe was already halfway onto his mount. "If we stop, we're dead, and a lot of people are counting on those meds," Joe said, pointing at the horse. Sam screamed in frustration and grabbed the saddle, pulling himself up into the seat as the two of them took off on their steeds at a tear. "What the fuck was that?" Joe screamed back at him as they cleared the limits of the small town, his face a red mask of anger as he fixed Sam in his gaze. "Trying to help him?" Sam asked, aghast that Joe would question him over this. "You knew as well as I did that was an unwinnable situation," Joe screamed over the sound of their horses racing through the street. "If we stopped to help him, we were all dead. You know that, man." Sam grimaced in frustration. He did know that, and on any other day, he might have made the same call as Joe in this situation. But Jacob had stopped to help him. He'd been Sam's responsibility, and he hadn't faced his death bravely like a soldier prepared to die. He'd screamed for them, reached for them, begged them not to leave him. And they callously had left him behind. A civilian left to the wolves, likely already dead. Sam had seen many people die in front of him throughout his long and storied career with the NYPD. He'd killed many and faced death countless times. But for as long as he might live, Sam believed he'd never rid himself of the sight of Jacob's terrified face, his arm reaching for them as he begged them not to leave him there on the street. Chapter 26. Julio was in a foul mood as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the sky. He was tired of this camping bullshit. They'd spent months out here moving from town to town, searching in vain over and over again, trying to find the men who had brought such dishonor and shame to their family. They started by combing Manhattan after the bombing, but that was fruitless. Julio knew Shields would never keep his family in the city, not after he'd abandoned it so many years ago. He had been one of the many who had fled in the wake of the bombings, and so Julio had no choice but to find out where he had gone. To do that, he needed to find those who knew Shields, who worked alongside him. He was a legendary pig, so the other NYPD pigs might know something. He had his men take as many cops off the street as they could get their hands on, and he personally oversaw their interrogations, one after the other. But unfortunately, many of them had joined the force after he'd driven Shields off, and they had no idea where they might be. Then one day, Julio had gotten lucky. His men had pulled an old captain from a command center set up in a police precinct, slaughtering everyone within and pulling this geezer from the remains. This was someone who had known Shields well, and the tough old goat had lasted for far longer than Julio had guessed he would when faced with the drug lord's own special brand of pain. But eventually he broke, giving Julio a rough estimate of where he could find Shields, on a farm upstate in a certain area. But the area was huge, and there were many towns and farms to sift through. So far, they'd found nothing. And that meant more sleeping on rocks and shitting in the woods. And Julio Roja wasn't about to keep doing that for much longer. He could smell something boiling in the center of the large camp, and his nose turned up at it. "What the fuck is that?" he asked his men in Spanish. "Venison stew, jefe," the one closest to the pot responded, reaching in with a steel spoon to give it a stir. "Again?" he asked through clenched teeth. "That's been the last 3 nights." "There ain't much out here, jefe," the cook said, and Julio's eyes locked on him. "You saying you want to go home?" he asked the man, his voice dropping into a frightening low register. "No," the man said, dropping the spoon and holding up his hands in terror. "No, not at all. I was just saying that we haven't been able to—" "Relax, Carlos," Julio said, holding his own hand up to calm the man down. "It's fine. It actually smells all right." "Oh," Carlos said, thankful and breathing a sigh of relief. "Thank you, sir." "You're welcome," Julio said, coming up behind Carlos to look into the bubbling pot. He then quickly grabbed the cook by the back of the head and forcefully shoved his entire face into the boiling liquid. Carlos screamed into the liquid, which came out as he choked gurgles of pure agony, as his body flopped around like a fish out of water, and Julio continued to hold him under the surface of the soup. The camp's activity stopped dead, and everyone turned with mounting dread to watch as Julio continued to hold Carlos in place. Even his bits of burning stew splashed up against his own hands and forearms. Julio took the pain without so much as a grimace. "They can never see you scream," his uncle had once said to him. "A leader must remain strong, fearless, invincible in the face of all." Julio had taken that lesson to heart, and even on the day Shields had shoved a shard of glass into his eye, not one of his men had ever heard him scream in pain. That wasn't to say he didn't scream when that sharpened glass pierced his eyeball. It was just that none of his men had been there to witness it. Had anyone been there to tell the tale, Julio would have seen to their immediate death once he was back on his feet. Finally, Carlos's body went limp, and Julio let go of him, letting the pot swing with his momentum and dump him face first into the campfire. "I don't know who needs to hear this the most," he bellowed out to every man who followed him into these woods. "But we've been out here for months. We're a fucking army, and these are small-town, upstate hicks. And you're telling me we haven't been able to find these motherfuckers yet? These men who struck a seismic blow to our operation, who stole our beloved Dawn from us. Those men get to walk free while you're all sitting here, eating deer stew? Is that right?" His voice echoed through the camp, which fell deathly silent at his tirade. As Julio paused, he could hear his final question repeatedly flung back at him by the wind, over and over again, until it eventually died out. "You are 1,000 strong," Julio said, his voice carrying to all corners of the large campsite. "You are the entirety of our New York operations. You're all I have. And with 1,000 men, I can't find those two little fucks? Is that what you're all telling me?" Again, no one spoke. They all just looked at one another as if daring anyone to speak up. But none of them would. Not now and not ever. Speaking up at the wrong time could easily get you killed. That was why none of them dared ever question the decision to abandon their holdings in the city, to come out into the middle of nowhere, on this personal vendetta. They all remembered what had happened to the last person who had openly questioned their boss about that particular course of action. Julio felt completely at ease around these men. Though they were 1,000, and he was but one man, he knew none of them would ever conspire against him. They'd never rise against his leadership. It wasn't because they were weak, or even because they were afraid. It was because underneath it all, they respected him and his ability to rule over them. The Rojas had led the cartel to fame and fortune, and they'd done so through fear, cunning, and bravery in the face of certain death. There wasn't a man among these 1,000 who could hold a candle to him. Not now and not ever. "Jefe!" The sound of the word cut through the silence of the camp, drawing the attention of the entire cartel army, and Julio himself. A nameless, faceless soldier Julio had never encountered before was pushing through the group, eventually emerging into the clearing that had formed around the campfire. Julio said nothing to the man. He had no idea if this person was even worthy of his attention just yet. So he simply stared. His eye bore into the young man with all the warmth of a snake watching a mouse scurry about. The intensity of Julio's stare seemed to cause the young man's confidence to waver, and Julio watched with casual interest as his knees nearly buckled from the stress of the moment. "Oh, we saw him," the soldier stammered, his face pale and getting paler by the second. Julio straightened up, taking 3 steps in the man's direction. To his credit, the cartel soldier didn't back away from him. He was shaking, but he didn't retreat. Julio liked that. "What did you say?" Julio asked. The conversation was watched by nearly 1,000 different men, and you could hear the sound of an acorn falling from a tree in the wake of their silent attention. "Shields," the soldier said, finding the courage to look up into the storm cloud that was Julio's eye. "We found him and the big guy." Julio was now even more interested and stepped forward again until he stood directly above the young man. The soldier couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. Julio didn't know his name or what he had done. He was a nameless, faceless grunt, and yet, depending on what he was about to tell him, he might be hailed as a hero among the cartel, establishing his career as a true legend. Or he would be violently and horrifically murdered before the eyes of his brothers. Julio said nothing. He simply waited for the young man to explain himself. His face never changed its expression, but inside he was a twisted cluster of nerves and anxiety. Had they really done it? Had they found Shields? Was this mission nearly over? Or had they killed Shields? Julio's heart threatened to stop at the thought of that. His men were all under strict orders to take Shields and the boy alive. No one, save for Julio himself, was permitted to strike that final blow. If this little louse had taken his revenge from him, then his death would be slow and torturous. The man started to say, looking around, as if he suddenly realized that he had the full and undivided attention of the entire cartel army. They were in an abandoned town looking for supplies. We fought them, but they got away, and then... The man's words were cut off as Julio's arm shot out, his hand grabbing the young soldier by the neck in a death grip that closed his throat off instantly. His words vanished, and his eyes bulged as the soldier immediately fell to his knees, looking up at his leader with the fear of death itself shining on his face. "I'm going to let you breathe in a second," Julio said, his voice low and even, but still strong enough to be heard by all 1,000 men gathered around the campfire. "And when I do, you're going to tell me in one sentence why I shouldn't kill you. One sentence, that's all you get. Am I understood?" The man nodded frantically, his face turning red with exertion. Julio released his death grip on the man's throat and watched as the soldier collapsed into his hands and knees. He coughed a few times, drawing air back into his sore throat and gasping at the sudden relief. Julio often found it amusing how people seldom appreciated the gift of oxygen until it was denied to them. "We fought them, and they ran, but we got the guy with them," he screamed, holding up his hands as if to hold off the inevitable assault that would claim his life. Julio didn't move. He simply watched this man continue to cower in front of him, letting the meaning of his life-saving sentence sink in. He slowly crouched in front of the soldier until his face was level with that of his potential victim. "What do you mean by got him?" he asked. Chapter 27. Julio walked through the far end of the camp, the young soldier trailing behind him just a few steps as the crowd of his subordinates parted in front of him. He never had to even slow his gait to make it through the tightly packed sea of human life. Eventually, he came to a small tent, outside of which 2 armed men were standing. "This is my crew's tent," the man said, pointing at their destination with a shaking finger. He likely understood how close he had just come to death. Julio had often observed how the soldiers spared his wrath seemed to appreciate their continued existence so much more in those first few moments. Though despite their relief, they were often still rattled by how close they had come to the edge of oblivion. This man was no different. Julio stared at the 2 armed guards who stood on either side of the tent's opening. They remained upright and still, rifles gripped in their hands. They were doing their best not to stare at the leader of their forces as he stood in front of them. But Julio noticed their eyes darting about, the beads of sweat forming on their temples, and the gentle shake of their kneecaps. He stared at them impatiently, waiting for them to move on their own, but they seemed so intent on not staring at him that they didn't realize they were actually barring his way. "Move, you idiots!" The young soldier, who Julio had nearly killed, called out in the same way that one might scream to a child to get out of the street as a speeding car approached. They instantly seemed to remember how their legs worked and suddenly parted, granting Julio entry. He passed into the tent, and his eye quickly adjusted to the lantern-lit space. It was a small tent, barely capable of fitting 5 people. 2 armed men stood inside on either side of a bundle on the floor. It was a broken, bleeding man, curled into the fetal position. His arms were bound behind him, and his ankles tied together. His blood was spreading along the tent floor, forming a morbid pool around him. He was losing blood fast, so Julio didn't have much time. The man looked up at him, his eyes focusing on Julio's face. He could tell the eye patch that covered the ruined tissue that had once housed an eye drew his attention. He could instantly tell this man knew exactly who he was looking at. Julio crouched in front of him, intensely looking through his one eye at the doomed soul who squirmed in front of him like a worm on the sidewalk after a heavy rainfall. But then Julio's expression softened, a small half-smile forming on his face. "Is this any way to treat our friends?" he asked his men in English, snapping his fingers and pointing at the bound man. "Untie him. Let's get him somewhere here to treat these wounds." There was a cloud of confusion spreading through the room. These men were clearly even stupider than Julio thought. He curled his lips and gave a sharp whistle, which seemed to wake them up and allow the meaning of his words to filter into their dim brains. They rushed forward, untying the man. He groaned in agony and surprise, moving his arms and legs painfully. One of the soldiers rushed from the tent, presumably to find a medic. "You look like you've been through the ringer, amigo," Julio said, trying to give the man a reassuring smile that would set his mind at ease. "Are you gonna kill me?" he asked, his voice shaking so much that it nearly made him unintelligible. "Kill you?" Julio asked, blinking in surprise. "Amigo, I just met you, and I don't kill my friends. Are we going to be friends?" There was a silence following this question, as the man's confused and pained face tried to gather meaning from his words. "What's your name, man?" Julio asked, his patience seemingly infinite with this prisoner. Jacob," the bundle before him said. "Ah, Jacob," Julio said. "You've been through some shit, eh?" "Please help me," Jacob said, the first spark of hope springing to life in his voice. "I could do that," Julio said. "I could very easily help you, Jacob. But what do I get out of that?" "What?" Jacob asked, looking up at him as his expression darkened with confusion. "What do you mean?" "Well, if I get you medical attention, then I'll be saving your life," Julio said matter-of-factly, as though considering all of this for the first time. "But then what do I get out of this arrangement? Do I get anything? What's in it for me if I save your life?" "Please," Jacob said again, tears spilling from his eyes and mixing with blood on his face. "Please." This man was clearly no warrior. He was a civilian who must have followed along with Shields on a mission. He had no warrior's resolve, no stoic honor in the face of death. This was simply a normal man who wanted to live. "You know who I am?" Julio asked, watching Jacob's eyes focus intently on his face, his gaze moving once more to the patch that covered one of his eyes. He nodded. "Who am I?" Julio asked him, wanting to hear him say the words, instead of simply acknowledging him with a gesture. "Say my name." "You're," Jacob said, before a wet cough silenced him. He swallowed whatever bile or blood had tried to come up with that cough, and continued. "You're Julio Roja." "That's right," Julio said. "And I know who told you that." He pointed to his eye patch. "The same man who gave me this. The same man who left you to bleed and die in the street." The soldier who had brought Julio here had filled him in on the way. He'd told him how Shields and the big man had run off, leaving this man to die as he had screamed to them for help. "Say his name." Jacob opened his mouth to respond and then paused, closing it again. Julio let out a small laugh. This man still held some loyalty to Shields, even after being left to die on the road like a dog. "Come on," Julio said, reaching out to pat Jacob on the shoulder. Smacking his palm lightly down on a bullet wound there, and watching as the man recoiled from his touch, as though he were made of lava. I know you know it. You know I know it. So really, what's the harm in saying it? He watched Jacob ponder that for a moment and weigh the pros and cons of saying the name in his head. Julio clearly knew who he'd arrived in that town with, and he wasn't going to continue asking the same pointless question forever. There was movement behind them as a medic entered the tent with a first aid kit. Jacob stared at the man and the kit he clutched in his hands with eyes of relief. He looked up at the medic as though he were God himself, descending from heaven to bring him some much-needed salvation. But Julio held up a hand, stopping the medic's approach. Jacob's eyes darkened with concern, looking from the medic back to Julio. Now he understood. Julio could feel it. The medic wasn't his salvation, his savior, his God. Julio was. And the only road to salvation was to say the name, to give Julio what he wanted. Sam, Jacob said, forcing the word out as though it was difficult to say. Sam Shields. There we go, Julio said, allowing the medic to walk forward a few paces before stopping him again. He watched the light of hope flicker and die in Jacob's eyes once more, his questioning gaze moving back to Julio's face, with the sting of betrayal twisting his features. Now, you're going to tell me where I can find that piece of shit and his scumbag son, Julio said. And Jacob recoiled as he struck, skidding back through his own pooled blood. He realized immediately that this tent wasn't a place of salvation, where he could get patched up and nursed back to health. It was an interrogation room, one where he'd experience the true horrors of hell if he didn't cooperate. No, he said, summoning up all of his courage and shaking his head. No, I can't tell you that. But you know the answer, Julio observed with a smile. Jacob closed his mouth, not willing to say anything else that might betray his former friends. Julio nodded in understanding. He was slightly impressed. This man might have been a civilian, but he clearly wasn't a total coward. He was loyal to Shields, and that had always confused Julio. How could a man like Shields inspire such loyalty in people who followed him? From his former fellow pigs on the police force, to normal everyday men and women like this doomed soul in front of him. Julio had often found people showing extreme levels of devotion and loyalty to this man. It was not unlike the respect and deference the soldiers of the cartel showed him in many ways. But in many other ways, it was completely different from the loyalty he commanded. His men were terrified of him. He'd cultivated their fear over many years, going to extreme lengths to make them understand how dangerous he was and how high the cost of betrayal ran. But this kind of loyalty was so different and so alien to Julio. It seemed it came from a place of respect. Perhaps these people felt like they owed something to Shields. Or was it something different? Was it simple fondness, friendship, gratitude? Julio hated it. Jacob, Julio said, all emotion draining from his face with practiced slowness, drawing out the moment to allow the reality of the situation to sink into the prisoner's mind. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't salvation. He wasn't God. He was the devil. You're going to tell me where Shields is. Both him and that son of his, and you're going to tell me in excruciating detail. He drew out those last two words, letting their meaning sink into his victim's head. Jacob looked around the tent, as if hoping noble saviors were going to burst in at any moment and rescue him from this hell. But there was nothing and no one to save him. He was alone in a den of wolves now, and it was feeding time. Julio's face broke with a flash of rage and impatience. He threw himself at Jacob, screaming in rage. His fist balled and tight as it slammed down into the honorable young man's body, over and over again. The camp was soon filled with the dueling sounds of Julio's hate and Jacob's terror and pain.